Marcus Thompson arrived at Fort Bragg on a scorching Tuesday morning in July 1943. The dust kicked up by the military truck settled around his worn boots as he stepped down with his single duffel bag. At 19, he was smaller than most recruits, with thick glasses that made his brown eyes look enormous behind the lenses. His uniform hung loose on his thin frame, making him appear even younger than his age. The other soldiers noticed him immediately. While they carried themselves with the swagger of men ready for war, Marcus walked with his shoulders slightly hunched, constantly adjusting his glasses that seemed too big for his narrow face. His quiet demeanor and bookish appearance made him an easy target from day one. "Look what the Army dragged in," laughed Sergeant Pike, a burly man from Texas with arms like tree trunks. "Did your mama pack you extra sandwiches in that bag, boy?" The other recruits erupted in laughter as Marcus silently made his way to the barracks. During the first week of training, Marcus struggled with every physical challenge. While other recruits scaled walls and crawled under barbed wire with ease, Marcus moved awkwardly, his glasses constantly fogging up or sliding down his nose. The obstacle course became his daily nightmare. Each morning, as reveille sounded at dawn, Marcus would wake with a knot in his stomach, knowing another day of humiliation awaited him. The worst part was rifle training. Marcus had never held a gun before joining the Army. His thin fingers trembled as he tried to load ammunition, and his shots consistently missed the target by wide margins. The drill instructor, Sergeant Morrison, would stand behind him shouting instructions that only made Marcus more nervous. "Thompson, your grandmother could shoot better blindfolded," Morrison would bellow, causing ripples of laughter from the other trainees. Marcus would adjust his glasses, take a deep breath, and try again, only to miss once more. The evenings brought no relief. In the mess hall, Marcus often sat alone while groups of soldiers bonded over shared jokes and stories from home. When he did try to join conversations, his soft voice and gentle manner seemed to irritate the others. They saw weakness where Marcus simply possessed a different kind of strength. Private Johnson, a loud young man from Chicago, took particular pleasure in making Marcus the target of pranks. He would hide Marcus's glasses while he showered, put salt in his coffee, or short-sheet his bed. Each incident drew laughter from spectators, but Marcus never retaliated. He would simply clean up the mess, find his glasses, and continue with his duties. The breaking point came during the third week. During a particularly challenging drill that involved carrying heavy equipment across muddy terrain, Marcus fell behind the group. His glasses had been knocked off by a low-hanging branch, and he was feeling around blindly in the mud when the others noticed his predicament. Instead of helping, several recruits began placing bets on how long it would take him to find his glasses. Some threw clumps of mud in different directions, calling out false directions to confuse him further. Marcus crawled on his hands and knees, his uniform now completely covered in brown muck, desperately searching for the glasses that were his lifeline to clear vision. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Marcus found his glasses partially buried under a fallen log. As he cleaned them on his muddy shirt, he could hear the laughter and mocking comments continuing around him. His face burned with shame, but he said nothing. He simply put on his glasses, picked up his equipment, and continued the drill. That night, as Marcus lay in his narrow bunk listening to the sounds of other soldiers talking and laughing, he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake joining the Army. Back home in Ohio, he had worked in his father's small bookstore, spending quiet hours organizing shelves and helping customers find the perfect novel or reference book. The decision to enlist had surprised everyone, including himself, but something had driven him to walk into the recruitment office that spring day. Maybe it was the news reports about the war, or the letters from his older brother David, who was already serving overseas. Perhaps it was simply a quiet determination to prove that even someone like him could serve his country with honor. As the lights went out in the barracks, Marcus made a silent promise to himself. Tomorrow would be another day of challenges, another day of ridicule and physical trials that seemed impossible for someone of his slight build and gentle nature. But he would not quit. Something deep inside told him that his time would come, that the very qualities that made others mock him might someday prove to be exactly what was needed. What Marcus didn't know was that his every move was being watched by someone who recognized something special in the quiet young man from Ohio. Someone who had seen that particular combination of determination and unusual awareness before, and knew it for what it truly was: Colonel James Patterson had been observing the new recruits from his office window for 3 weeks. At 52, he was a decorated veteran who had served in the First World War and understood that soldiers came in all shapes and sizes. What caught his attention about Marcus Thompson wasn't his struggles with physical training, but rather something else entirely. It started during the second week when Patterson noticed Marcus during the night watch rotations. While other soldiers on guard duty would chat quietly among themselves, smoke cigarettes, or even doze off when they thought no one was looking, Marcus remained completely alert. His posture was different during these dark hours, more confident and assured than during the daylight drills. The colonel had begun taking late-night walks around the base, partly due to his own insomnia but also to check on security. During these walks, he observed something remarkable about the young man everyone else dismissed as weak. Marcus seemed to notice things others missed. His head would turn towards sounds that were barely audible, and his eyes would track movements in the shadows that even Patterson had to strain to see. One particular night, Patterson decided to test his observations. He deliberately took a longer route around the perimeter, moving as quietly as his years of military training had taught him. Most guards never detected his presence during these informal inspections. But as he approached Marcus's post, the young man's voice called out softly into the darkness. "Good evening, Colonel Patterson. Quiet night tonight, but there's been some unusual activity near the east fence about 20 minutes ago. Probably just a raccoon family, but I thought you should know." Patterson stepped into the dim light cast by the guard post lantern, genuinely surprised. Not only had Marcus detected his approach, but he had also noticed and properly assessed the minor disturbance that Patterson himself had investigated earlier. Most impressively, he had made this observation while simultaneously maintaining watch over his assigned sector. "How did you know it was me, soldier?" Patterson asked, curious about the young man's response. Marcus adjusted his glasses nervously, the confident bearing from moments before flickering back to his usual shy demeanor. "Your walking pattern, sir. Everyone has a unique rhythm when they move. Yours is very measured, like someone who's thinking while they walk. And your boots have a slight scuff on the left heel that creates a distinctive sound." The colonel studied Marcus more carefully. During the day, the same young man could barely complete a rope climb or hit a target at 50 yards. But here in the darkness, he displayed an almost supernatural awareness of his surroundings. Patterson had seen this phenomenon only a few times before in his military career, and it always indicated something special. Over the following nights, Patterson continued his informal observations. He watched as Marcus consistently performed guard duties with an excellence that stood in stark contrast to his daytime struggles. The young man seemed to possess an internal radar that detected the slightest changes in the environment around him. A bird's call that was slightly off-key, footsteps that were too regular to be natural, or shadows that moved against the wind patterns. During one memorable evening, Marcus quietly alerted the camp to a potential security breach when he noticed that the guard dogs were behaving strangely. His observation led to the discovery of a small group of local teenagers who had been planning to sneak onto the base as a dare. What impressed Patterson most was that Marcus had detected the intrusion a full hour before the dogs had begun barking, and 2 hours before any other guard had noticed anything unusual. The colonel began to research Marcus's background more thoroughly. The young man came from a small town in Ohio where his family ran a modest bookstore. His academic record showed exceptional grades, particularly in subjects requiring attention to detail and pattern recognition. Teachers' comments described him as unusually observant and possessing an almost photographic memory for written material. What intrigued Patterson most was a note from Marcus's high school principal describing an incident where the young man had prevented a potential accident by noticing that a school bus driver was showing signs of a medical emergency before anyone else had detected the problem. The driver later confirmed that he had been experiencing the early symptoms of what turned out to be a minor stroke. As Patterson pieced together this information, a picture began to emerge of a young man whose exceptional abilities were completely misunderstood by those around him. The same sensitivity that made him seem weak and unsuited for daytime military exercises transformed him into an extraordinarily effective sentinel when darkness fell. The colonel had heard stories from old-timers in the military about soldiers like this. They called them night sentinels, men whose unique combination of awareness and instinct made them invaluable for certain specialized roles. These individuals were rare, perhaps 1 in 10,000, and they often went unrecognized because their talents didn't fit conventional military molds. Patterson realized that Marcus Thompson wasn't failing as a soldier. He was simply being trained for the wrong role. The question was whether the young man could survive the ridicule and physical demands long enough for Patterson to find the right opportunity to utilize his extraordinary gifts. The colonel made a decision that would change everything. It was time to have a private conversation with Marcus Thompson, but first he needed to witness one more demonstration of the young man's remarkable abilities. Patterson planned a test that would either confirm his suspicions or force him to reconsider his assessment entirely. The test came on a moonless Thursday night in August. Colonel Patterson had arranged for a special training exercise that he described to the other officers as a routine security drill. What he didn't tell them was that the exercise was designed specifically to evaluate one soldier's unique abilities under challenging conditions. Marcus had no idea he was being tested. He had been assigned to the midnight watch along the base's most sensitive perimeter, a section that bordered dense woods and provided multiple potential approaches for anyone attempting unauthorized entry. The area was known for being difficult to monitor effectively, with thick trees creating numerous blind spots and natural sounds that could mask the movement of intruders. Patterson had arranged for a team of experienced soldiers to attempt a simulated infiltration from multiple directions. These men were specialists in stealth operations, trained to move silently and avoid detection. Their mission was to reach a designated target building without being spotted by the guard on duty. For most sentries, this would be a nearly impossible task to prevent. As midnight approached, Marcus took his position at the guard post with his usual quiet determination. The ridicule from his fellow soldiers had intensified over recent weeks. Just that morning, someone had replaced his shaving cream with whipped cream from the mess hall, and during afternoon drills, Sergeant Pike had made him crawl under the obstacle course twice because his first attempt was too slow for a real soldier. But as darkness settled over the base, Marcus seemed to transform. His posture straightened, his nervous fidgeting disappeared, and his eyes took on an intensity that was completely absent during daylight hours. He began his systematic scan of the perimeter, a routine he had developed that involved listening carefully to the natural sounds of the night and watching for any disruption in the normal patterns. The first infiltrator began his approach from the eastern section at 12:15. He was a corporal with 2 years of specialized training in covert operations, moving through the underbrush with the skill of a professional hunter. His path took him through a drainage ditch that provided excellent cover and would normally allow him to reach within 50 yards of his target without detection. Marcus's head turned slightly toward the east 6 minutes after the corporal began moving. His hand moved to the small notepad he kept at his station, and he made a brief notation. He didn't immediately sound an alert, instead continuing his careful observation of the entire perimeter while tracking the movement he had detected. From his concealed observation post 300 yards away, Colonel Patterson watched through military binoculars as Marcus demonstrated the exact behavior he had hoped to see. The young man had identified the threat but was maintaining discipline, gathering more information before taking action. The second infiltrator approached from the north 10 minutes later. This soldier was even more experienced, having served in reconnaissance missions overseas. He moved in short bursts between periods of complete stillness, a technique that made detection extremely difficult even for trained guards. Most sentries would never notice his approach until he was dangerously close to his objective. Marcus's response was immediate, but subtle. Without taking his eyes off the eastern approach where he was still tracking the first infiltrator, he shifted his position slightly to get a better view of the northern sector. His breathing remained calm and controlled, but Patterson could see that the young man's level of alertness had increased significantly. The third and most challenging test came 20 minutes later, when the final infiltrator began moving from the western approach. This soldier was a sergeant with extensive experience in night operations, and his chosen path involved climbing over a section of fence in an area where thick trees would normally provide complete concealment from the guard post. What happened next convinced Patterson that his assessment of Marcus was completely accurate. Without any visible signal that he had detected the third intrusion, Marcus quietly lifted a small mirror and used the reflection to observe the western fence line while maintaining visual contact with both eastern and northern approaches. The technique was something he had clearly developed himself, showing an intuitive understanding of surveillance methods that most soldiers never acquired, even with extensive training. As the three infiltrators continued their approaches, Marcus made careful notations on his pad while maintaining his outward appearance of routine guard duty. To any casual observer, he would have appeared to be conducting normal security rounds, but Patterson could see that the young man was tracking multiple threats simultaneously while developing what appeared to be a comprehensive response plan. At 12:45, when all three infiltrators were within 100 yards of their targets and moving in for their final approaches, Marcus took action. Instead of sounding a general alarm that would have alerted the intruders to his awareness, he used a series of discreet hand signals to alert other guard posts to the specific locations of each threat. The result was a coordinated response that led to the capture of all three infiltrators before they could reach their objectives. What should have been a successful training exercise for the attacking team turned into a complete demonstration of superior defensive awareness. After the exercise concluded, Patterson approached Marcus at his guard post. The young man was completing his incident report with the same methodical attention to detail that characterized everything he did during night duties. "Excellent work tonight, Thompson," the colonel said quietly. Marcus looked up, surprised to see the commanding officer at his post. "Thank you, sir. Just doing my job." Patterson studied the young man's face in the dim light. "Tell me, son, how did you know they were coming?" Marcus adjusted his glasses thoughtfully. "The night sounds changed, sir. Birds stopped singing in certain areas, and I could hear small branches breaking in patterns that didn't match wind movement. Also, there were 3 separate areas where the normal insect sounds were disrupted, which suggested coordinated movement rather than random animal activity." The colonel nodded slowly. After 30 years in the military, he had finally found what he had been looking for. Tomorrow everything would change for Marcus Thompson. The next morning brought the usual routine of ridicule for Marcus. During breakfast, someone had loosened the salt shaker cap so that when he tried to season his eggs, half the container emptied onto his plate. The mess hall erupted in laughter as Marcus quietly scraped off what he could and continued eating. Private Johnson high-fived his friends, proud of his latest prank. "Maybe Thompson needs glasses for his food too," Johnson announced loudly. "Can't even see how much salt he's putting on those eggs." The laughter grew louder, and Marcus felt his face burn with embarrassment. He had been hoping that somehow his successful night duty would earn him some respect. But clearly nothing had changed. After breakfast, the regular morning drills began with their familiar pattern of humiliation. During rope climbing, Marcus made it only halfway up before his sweaty palms caused him to slide back down. Sergeant Pike shook his head in disgust and made Marcus attempt the climb 3 more times, while other recruits watched and whispered among themselves. "I don't know why they even bother training him," Marcus overheard one soldier say to another. "He'll never make it in real combat. They should just send him home to his mama." The weapons training session was particularly brutal. Marcus's hands shook as he tried to assemble his rifle quickly, and he dropped several pieces on the ground. The drill instructor's harsh criticism echoed across the training field, and Marcus could feel the eyes of dozens of soldiers watching his struggles with a mixture of amusement and pity. By noon, Marcus was exhausted and demoralized. He sat alone during lunch, mechanically eating his sandwich while trying to ignore the ongoing jokes at his expense from nearby tables. He began to seriously consider requesting a transfer or even leaving the army entirely. Perhaps everyone was right. Perhaps he simply wasn't cut out for military life. It was then that a shadow fell across his table. Marcus looked up to see Colonel Patterson standing beside him, holding his own lunch tray. The entire mess hall seemed to fall quiet as every soldier noticed the commanding officer's unexpected appearance. "Mind if I join you, Thompson?" Patterson asked in his calm, authoritative voice. Marcus nearly choked on his sandwich. "Of course not, sir. Please sit down." He scrambled to make room, accidentally knocking over his water glass in his nervousness. The wire. Colonel sat down across from Marcus and began eating his lunch as if sharing a table with the camp's most ridiculed recruit was the most natural thing in the world. Every eye in the mess hall was focused on their table, and conversations dropped to whispers as soldiers tried to understand what was happening. "I've been watching your progress, Thompson," Patterson said quietly, speaking just loudly enough for Marcus to hear. "Your daytime performance has been consistent with your training records." Marcus's heart sank. This was it. The colonel was going to tell him he was being discharged or transferred to some non-combat role where he couldn't embarrass the army any further. But Patterson's next words completely surprised him. "However, your nighttime duties have been exceptional. Last night's security exercise demonstrated skills that are extremely rare in the military." Marcus blinked in confusion. "Sir, I'm not sure I understand." The colonel leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice even more. "Son, are you familiar with the concept of nocturnal awareness enhancement?" "No, sir." "It's a documented phenomenon where certain individuals possess heightened sensory abilities that become particularly acute during nighttime conditions. These people often struggle with conventional daytime activities but demonstrate extraordinary capabilities when darkness falls." Marcus adjusted his glasses nervously. "Are you saying there's something wrong with me, sir?" Patterson smiled, the first genuinely warm expression Marcus had seen from any superior officer since arriving at camp. "On the contrary, Thompson. I'm saying there's something very right with you. Something that makes you potentially invaluable to specific military operations." The colonel's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "There are missions that require skills you possess naturally. Operations where the ability to detect threats in complete darkness, to move silently through hostile territory, and to remain alert for extended periods can mean the difference between success and catastrophic failure." Marcus felt a strange mixture of hope and disbelief. After weeks of being told he was worthless as a soldier, the base commander was suggesting he might actually have valuable abilities. "What does this mean, sir?" Marcus asked quietly. Patterson glanced around the mess hall, noting that every soldier was straining to overhear their conversation. He made a decision that would change not only Marcus's military career, but also how every person in that room viewed the quiet young man they had been mocking. Standing up from his chair, Colonel Patterson's voice carried clearly across the entire mess hall. The room fell into complete silence as every soldier focused on the commanding officer's words. "Gentlemen, I want to share something important with you about Private Thompson." Patterson placed his hand on Marcus's shoulder, causing the young man to look up in surprise. "This soldier demonstrated last night that he possesses abilities that are extremely rare and valuable in military operations." The silence in the room was so complete that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. He saw confusion and disbelief on the faces of soldiers who had been mocking him just minutes earlier. Patterson's voice grew stronger, taking on the tone of official military communication. "Private Thompson successfully detected and tracked multiple coordinated infiltration attempts during a classified security exercise. His performance exceeded that of soldiers with years of specialized training." Private Johnson's mouth fell open. Sergeant Pike stopped chewing his food. The entire mess hall remained frozen in stunned silence as the colonel continued. "Some soldiers excel at daytime operations. Others, like Private Thompson, possess gifts that make them invaluable when darkness falls." Patterson's eyes swept across the room, making contact with several of the soldiers who had been loudest in their ridicule of Marcus. "He bears the mark of a night sentinel." The words night sentinel hung in the air like thunder. Marcus had never heard the term before, but the way Colonel Patterson spoke it suggested something significant and respected. Around the mess hall he could see confusion on most faces, but a few of the older sergeants seemed to recognize the phrase, and their expressions had shifted from skepticism to something approaching awe. Sergeant Morrison, the drill instructor who had tormented Marcus during rifle training, slowly stood up from his table. His weathered face showed a mixture of surprise and what looked like embarrassment. Morrison had served in the Pacific Theater during the early days of the war, and he clearly understood the implications of the colonel's statement. "Sir," Morrison said carefully, "are you saying that Thompson has been identified as having those particular capabilities?" Patterson nodded gravely. "The signs have been evident for weeks to anyone who knew what to look for. His performance during nighttime security duties has been consistently exceptional. Last night's exercise simply confirmed what I had already begun to suspect." Marcus felt every eye in the room focused on him, but the quality of attention had changed completely. Instead of mockery and contempt, he saw curiosity and uncertainty. Some soldiers were whispering to each other, clearly asking what a night sentinel was, while others who seemed to know were explaining in hushed tones. Private Johnson, who had been the source of so many pranks and jokes at Marcus's expense, looked particularly confused. He raised his hand tentatively as if he were back in school. "Colonel Patterson, sir, what exactly is a night sentinel?" The colonel remained standing, clearly deciding to use this moment as a teaching opportunity for the entire unit. Night sentinels are soldiers who possess an extremely rare combination of enhanced sensory awareness, pattern recognition abilities, and psychological traits that make them extraordinarily effective in nocturnal operations. He began pacing slowly in front of Marcus's table, his voice taking on the tone of a military instructor. These individuals often appear unremarkable during standard daytime training. They may struggle with conventional physical exercises, weapons training, or group activities. But when darkness falls, they become something entirely different. Marcus listened in amazement as the colonel described abilities he had never realized he possessed, behaviors he had simply thought were normal ways of paying attention to his surroundings. A true night sentinel can detect movement at distances that would be impossible for ordinary soldiers. They can identify threats by sound, smell, or subtle changes in environmental patterns. Most importantly, they can maintain peak alertness for extended periods while operating in complete darkness. Patterson turned to look directly at Marcus. These soldiers have historically been invaluable for reconnaissance missions, perimeter security in hostile territory, and specialized operations where conventional surveillance methods are inadequate. The colonel's voice grew more serious. The military has documented fewer than 50 confirmed night sentinels in the past 20 years. They are so rare that most officers will serve entire careers without encountering one. Sergeant Pike, the burly Texan who had been among Marcus's harshest critics, cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, does this mean that Thompson will be transferred to special operations?" "That decision hasn't been made yet," Patterson replied. "But it does mean that Private Thompson's training program will be modified significantly, starting immediately." The colonel sat back down at Marcus's table, but this time his posture was different, more formal and respectful. "Thompson, I'm going to be honest with you about what this means. Your daytime training will continue because every soldier needs basic combat skills. But you'll also begin specialized instruction designed to develop and refine your natural abilities." Marcus found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "What kind of specialized training, sir?" "Advanced surveillance techniques, silent movement, extended duration alertness protocols, and threat assessment in low visibility conditions." Patterson paused, studying Marcus's face carefully. "The training will be challenging in different ways than what you've experienced so far. Are you prepared for that responsibility?" For the first time since arriving at Fort Bragg, Marcus felt a spark of genuine confidence. The abilities the colonel described weren't weaknesses or failures. They were strengths that had been misunderstood and misdirected. "Yes, sir. I'm ready." Patterson smiled and stood up from the table. "Excellent. Report to my office at 800 tomorrow morning. We'll begin your new training program immediately." As the colonel walked toward the exit, the mess hall remained unusually quiet. Marcus sat at his table, still processing everything that had happened. Around him, soldiers who had been laughing at his expenses just minutes earlier were now looking at him with expressions he had never seen before. Sergeant Morrison approached Marcus's table, his usual harsh demeanor replaced by something that looked almost like respect. "Thompson," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. I've been training soldiers for 15 years, and I should have recognized what you were." Marcus looked up at the drill instructor who had made his mornings miserable for weeks. "It's okay, Sergeant. I didn't understand it myself." Morrison shook his head. "No, it's not okay. A good instructor should be able to identify each soldier's strengths and help develop them. I failed you, and I failed this unit by not recognizing your abilities sooner." As Morrison walked away, Marcus noticed that the atmosphere in the entire mess hall had shifted. Conversations were quieter and more thoughtful. Several soldiers were looking at him with expressions of curiosity rather than contempt. For the first time in weeks, Marcus Thompson felt like he might actually belong in the United States Army. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but they would be challenges designed to build on his strengths rather than highlight his weaknesses. The transformation had begun, but Marcus had no idea how dramatically his life was about to change, or how his unique abilities would soon be put to a test that would determine not just his own fate, but the success of a critical mission that could affect the outcome of the war itself. Marcus arrived at Colonel Patterson's office at exactly 800 the next morning, his uniform pressed and his boots polished to a mirror shine. The transformation in how other soldiers treated him had been immediate and dramatic. At breakfast, instead of pranks and ridicule, he had received respectful nods and even a few attempts at conversation from men who had previously ignored him completely. The colonel's office was larger than Marcus had expected, with maps covering most of the wall space and a massive oak desk that looked like it had survived several wars. Patterson gestured for Marcus to sit in a leather chair across from his desk, then poured 2 cups of coffee from a pot that had been warming on a small electric burner. "Sleep well last night, Thompson?" Patterson asked, settling into his own chair. "Yes, sir. Better than I have since arriving here." Marcus accepted the coffee gratefully, surprised by this informal gesture from such a high-ranking officer. Patterson opened a thick manila folder that had been sitting on his desk. "I've been reviewing your complete military and personal records, along with some additional research I conducted yesterday evening. There are some things about your background that make more sense now." He pulled out several documents and spread them across the desk where Marcus could see them. "Your elementary school records show that you consistently excelled at activities requiring sustained attention and pattern recognition, but struggled with competitive sports and group activities that demanded quick physical responses." Marcus nodded, remembering those years. "I was always better at things like chess club in the school newspaper than basketball or baseball. Your high school guidance counselor noted that you had an unusual ability to notice when other students were having problems, often before teachers or even close friends became aware of the issues." Patterson looked up from the papers. "She specifically mentioned 3 instances where you alerted adults to students who were showing early signs of serious emotional distress. I just noticed when people seemed different than usual," Marcus said quietly. "It wasn't anything special." The colonel smiled. "That's exactly what makes it special, son. Most people are too focused on their own concerns to notice subtle changes in others. You have a natural ability to monitor multiple environmental factors simultaneously and detect when patterns change." Patterson closed the folder and leaned back in his chair. "Yesterday I received authorization from command to offer you a choice. You can continue with standard infantry training, and I'll ensure that your new duties include nighttime security assignments where you can utilize your abilities effectively." He paused, studying Marcus's face carefully. "Or you can volunteer for immediate transfer to a specialized unit that is specifically designed to utilize soldiers with your particular capabilities." Marcus felt his heart rate increase. "What kind of specialized unit, sir?" "I can't give you complete details unless you volunteer, but I can tell you that it involves reconnaissance missions behind enemy lines in the European theater. The work is extremely dangerous, but it's also critically important to the war effort." The colonel's expression grew more serious. "The unit has a high casualty rate, Thompson. I won't lie to you about that. But they also have a success rate that far exceeds any other reconnaissance operation in the military. Precisely because they utilize soldiers with abilities like yours." Marcus stared down at his coffee cup, trying to process the magnitude of what he was being offered. Just 24 hours earlier, he had been the camp's laughingstock, seriously considering leaving the army entirely. Now he was being offered a chance to join what sounded like an elite unit, where his unique abilities would be not just valued, but essential. "How much time do I have to decide, sir?" "I need an answer by 1700 hours today. If you volunteer, you'll be transferred immediately to a training facility in Virginia where you'll undergo 6 weeks of intensive preparation." Patterson leaned forward, his voice becoming more personal. "Thompson, I've served in this army for 30 years and I've learned to recognize soldiers who have the potential to make a real difference in this war. You're one of those soldiers." Marcus looked up from his coffee, meeting the colonel's steady gaze.
"Can I ask you something, sir?"
"Of course. Last night you said I bear the mark of a night sentinel. What did you mean by that?" Patterson was quiet for a long moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. Finally, he stood up and walked to one of the maps on the wall, pointing to a region of France marked with several red pins. "There's a resistance group operating in this area, that has been providing crucial intelligence about German troop movements. 3 weeks ago, they stopped communicating. We believe they've been compromised, but we need to know their status and, if possible, re-establish contact. He turned back to Marcus. Standard reconnaissance teams have attempted to reach this area twice. Both missions failed because the soldiers were detected before they could gather useful intelligence. The terrain is heavily forested, the German patrols are extremely active, and the entire region is under constant surveillance. Patterson returned to his desk, pulling out a photograph that showed a dense forest landscape. This mission requires someone who can move through that terrain at night without detection, someone who can remain hidden for extended periods while observing enemy activities, and someone who can identify threats before they become aware of his presence. Marcus studied the photograph, imagining himself moving through those dark woods. Instead of feeling fear, he felt something unexpected: excitement. For the first time, he was being offered a challenge that seemed to match his natural abilities rather than work against them. The mark of a night sentinel, Patterson continued, is a combination of natural ability and psychological makeup that makes certain individuals uniquely suited for this type of work. It's not something that can be taught or developed through training. Either you have it or you don't. The colonel sat back down, his expression growing more intense. Thompson, I believe you have the potential to complete missions that no other soldier in this army could accomplish. But I also believe that if you're not ready for this level of responsibility, it could cost not only your life but the lives of the people you're trying to help. Marcus set down his coffee cup, his hands surprisingly steady. He thought about the months of ridicule, the constant feeling of being in the wrong place, the certainty that he would never succeed as a soldier. Then he thought about the previous night, when for the first time since joining the army, he had felt completely confident in his abilities. I don't need until 1700 hours to decide, sir, Marcus said quietly. Colonel Patterson raised an eyebrow, waiting for Marcus to continue. The young man sat straighter in his chair, and for the first time since their conversation began, his voice carried complete certainty. I volunteer for the specialized unit. Sir? Patterson studied Marcus's face for several seconds, looking for any sign of doubt or hesitation. Finding none, he nodded slowly. Very well, Thompson. Your transfer orders will be processed immediately. The colonel opened his desk drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope. These are your travel documents and initial briefing materials. You'll depart Fort Bragg at 0600 tomorrow morning. A car will take you to the train station, and from there you'll travel to Camp Peary in Virginia. Marcus accepted the envelope, feeling its weight in his hands. Everything was happening so quickly that part of him wondered if he was making a mistake. But another part of him, the part that had felt so confident during nighttime guard duties, knew this was exactly what he was meant to do. There's something else you should know, Patterson said, his voice becoming more serious. Your new identity begins immediately. As far as anyone at Fort Bragg is concerned, you've been transferred to a standard infantry unit for advanced training. Only I and 2 other officers know your actual destination. The colonel stood up and walked to his office door, checking to ensure it was securely closed. The unit you're joining operates under complete secrecy. You won't be able to write letters home about your activities, and your family will receive only standard military correspondence indicating that you're serving somewhere in Europe. Marcus felt a pang of sadness thinking about his parents back in Ohio. His mother had been so proud when he enlisted, despite her worries about his gentle nature and physical limitations. His father had quietly expressed concern about whether Marcus would be able to handle the rigors of military life. Neither of them would ever know how dramatically their son's role in the war effort was about to change. I understand, sir, Marcus replied. Patterson returned to his desk and pulled out one final document. There's one more thing, Thompson. This mission I mentioned in France, it's not a hypothetical example. It's your first assignment after training. He handed Marcus a detailed topographical map showing the same forested region he had pointed to earlier. The resistance group that went silent is led by a woman named Marie Dubois. She's been coordinating intelligence gathering for 6 months, and her information has been crucial for planning Allied operations in that sector. Marcus studied the map carefully, noting the elevation changes, river crossings, and areas marked as suspected German patrol routes. What happened to the other reconnaissance teams that were sent in? The first team was captured 3 days into their mission. We believe they were betrayed by someone in a nearby village who was working with the Germans. The second team made it deeper into the forest but triggered some kind of alarm system. They were killed in a firefight before they could complete their objective. Patterson's expression grew grave. Thompson, what makes this mission particularly dangerous is that we suspect the Germans have established a new type of surveillance network in that area. They're using trained dogs, motion sensors, and regular patrol patterns that make conventional infiltration nearly impossible. Instead of feeling intimidated by this information, Marcus found himself analyzing the challenges and considering solutions. Sir, do we have any intelligence about the timing of these patrols or the locations of the sensor equipment? The colonel smiled, recognizing the analytical approach that confirmed his assessment of Marcus's capabilities. Some, but it's incomplete. That's part of what makes your abilities so valuable for this mission. You'll need to gather that information yourself while avoiding detection. Patterson walked back to the wall map and pointed to a specific location marked with a red circle. Marie Dubois was last known to be operating from a farmhouse in this area. Your mission is to locate her group, determine their status, and if possible, re-establish communications with Allied command. He turned back to Marcus. If the resistance group has been compromised, you're to gather as much intelligence as possible about German operations in the region and return with that information. Under no circumstances are you to attempt a rescue operation if it would compromise your ability to complete the primary mission. Marcus nodded, understanding the harsh realities of wartime operations. The intelligence Marie Dubois' group could provide might save hundreds of Allied lives, making their rescue secondary to the larger strategic objectives. Your training in Virginia will prepare you for every aspect of this mission, Patterson continued. You'll learn advanced infiltration techniques, silent communication methods, survival skills for extended operations behind enemy lines, and specialized equipment operation. The colonel returned to his chair, his demeanor shifting to something more personal. Thompson, I want you to understand something important. 6 months ago, I requested permission to develop a program for identifying and utilizing soldiers with capabilities like yours. Command approved the program, but they also made it clear that its success would be judged based on the results of the first operational mission. Marcus realized the full implications of what he was being told. You mean my mission will determine whether other soldiers like me get the chance to serve in similar roles? Exactly. You're not just representing yourself on this assignment. You're potentially opening the door for an entirely new approach to special operations. Patterson stood up and extended his hand to Marcus. Son, I have complete confidence in your abilities. The training you'll receive will give you the tools you need. But your natural instincts and awareness are what will keep you alive and make this mission successful. Marcus stood and shook the colonel's hand, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. I won't let you down, sir. I know you won't, Thompson. Now go get your affairs in order. You have a long journey ahead of you, and when you return from France, you'll be coming back as a very different kind of soldier. As Marcus walked out of Colonel Patterson's office, he passed through the main area where other recruits were preparing for their morning drills. Several of them nodded respectfully, still processing the dramatic revelation about his abilities from the previous day. Private Johnson approached him hesitantly. Thompson, I wanted to apologize for all the pranks and jokes. I had no idea. Marcus paused, looking at the young man who had made his first weeks at Fort Bragg so miserable. Instead of anger or resentment, he felt something unexpected, understanding. Johnson had simply been reacting to what he saw as weakness, not knowing that those very qualities that appeared weak in daylight would soon become strengths in the darkness of occupied France. No hard feelings, Johnson. We all have different roles to play in this war. As Marcus walked toward the barracks to pack his belongings, he reflected on the incredible transformation his life had undergone in less than 24 hours. The shy, bookish young man who had arrived at Fort Bragg 6 weeks earlier was about to become something he had never imagined possible. A night sentinel, operating behind enemy lines in one of the most dangerous assignments the military could offer. The ridicule was over. The real test was about to begin.